Welcome, everyone. My name is Joseph, or Joe for short. I am here to guide you and tell you more about my country, the Philippines. It will be my pleasure to share with you my country's history and culture. The Philippines, an archipelago comprising over 7,000 islands, boasts a rich and diverse history. Its strategic location in Southeast Asia has made it a melting pot of cultures influenced by indigenous civilizations, colonial powers, and modern global trends. The early history of the Philippines is marked by the existence of various indigenous groups. These tribes, such as the Negritos. Negrito refers to several diverse indigenous groups in Southeast Asia and the Andaman Islands, traditionally associated with a hunter-gatherer lifestyle and distinct physical features like short stature and dark skin, often linked to the first Sundaland people. These groups are known for their small stature, dark skin, and frizzy hair, which have led to comparisons with African pygmies. They have traditionally practiced a hunter-gatherer lifestyle, inhabiting isolated areas of Southeast Asia. Genetic studies suggest that Negrito populations are basal to other East and Southeast Asians, with some evidence of Denisovan admixture, particularly in the Philippine Negritos. The Negrito hypothesis proposes that these groups are descendants of a pre-Neolithic substrate of humanity, while others suggest their distinctive phenotype is due to convergent evolution. The Austronesians are a large group of people who speak Austronesian languages and are found across Taiwan, maritime Southeast Asia, parts of mainland Southeast Asia, Micronesia, coastal New Guinea, island Melanesia, Polynesia, and Madagascar. The Austronesian peoples, sometimes referred to as Austronesian-speaking peoples, are a large group of peoples who have settled in Taiwan, maritime Southeast Asia, parts of mainland Southeast Asia, Micronesia, coastal New Guinea, island Melanesia, Polynesia, and Madagascar that speak Austronesian languages. Austronesian languages are a diverse language family spoken by around 328 million people, making it the fifth largest language family by number of speakers. The Austronesian peoples are thought to have originated from the indigenous peoples of Taiwan. Austronesian peoples were known for their advanced maritime technologies, such as catamarans, outrigger boats, and lashed lug boats, which facilitated their rapid dispersal into the islands of the Indo-Pacific, culminating in the settlement of New Zealand around 1250 CE. Austronesian languages are seen as evidence of cultural and biological ancestry at the population level. The Austronesian peoples have a complex history of interactions and transformations shaped by their migrations and interactions with other cultures. Scientists all agree that people speaking Austronesian languages started out from Taiwan and settled the Philippines around 4,000 years ago. They used sails as early as 2,000 years ago. Together with other maritime technologies, this allowed them to disperse to the islands of the Indo-Pacific Ocean. Malays established intricate societies with complex social structures, trade systems, and belief systems. Archaeological finds, including the Angano petroglyphs and various artifacts, attest to the sophisticated nature of these ancient communities. Malays, an Austronesian ethno-religious group native to eastern Sumatra, the Malay Peninsula, and coastal Borneo, as well as the smaller islands that lie between these locations. These locations are today part of the countries of Malaysia, Indonesia, eastern and southern Sumatra, Bangka Belitung Islands, West Kalimantan, and Riau Islands, the southern part of Thailand Patani, Satan, Songkhla, Yala and Narathiwat, Singapore, and Brunei Darussalam. From about 4,000 years ago, some groups of Austronesians moved out of Taiwan to the Philippines, and about 3,500 years ago to northern Borneo, Sulawesi, and central Java. Subsequently, there was a further movement of Austronesians to Sumatra and the Malay Peninsula about 2,000 years ago. A competing hypothesis to the out-of-Taiwan hypothesis is the out-of-Sundaland hypothesis, favored by a few researchers, including Stephen Oppenheimer, an Oxford geneticist. According to them, the homeland of the Austronesians was the Sundaland landmass, which was drowned during the end of the last glacial period by rising sea levels. There is considerable linguistic, cultural, artistic, and social diversity among the many Malay subgroups, mainly due to hundreds of years of immigration and assimilation of various regional ethnicity and tribes within maritime Southeast Asia. Historically, the Malay population is descended primarily from the earlier Malayic-speaking Austronesians and Austroasiatic tribes who founded several ancient maritime trading states and kingdoms, notably Brunei, Kedah, Lankasuka, Ganga Negara, Chitu, Nakhon Si Thammarat, Pahang, Melayu, and Srivijaya. Before the arrival of foreign colonizers, the Philippines was a thriving region characterized by extensive trade networks. The archipelago traded with neighboring countries like China, India, and Japan, exchanging goods such as gold, pearls, and spices. The indigenous Filipinos developed advanced maritime skills, facilitating these interactions. The pre-colonial Philippines, roughly 900-1565 AD, saw the development of independent barangays, or small political units, led by datus, and a society with distinct social classes, religious beliefs, and cultural practices, including animism and a writing system called Baybayin. By the 13th or 14th century, the Baybayin script was used for the Tagalog language. It spread to Luzon, Mindoro, Palawan, Panay, and Leyte, but there is no proof it was used in Mindanao. There were at least 3 varieties of Baybayin in the late 16th century. These are comparable to different variations of Latin, which use slightly different sets of letters and spelling systems. In 1521, the chronicler Antonio Pigafetta, from the expedition of Ferdinand Magellan, noted that the people that they met in Visayas were not literate. However, in the next few decades, the Baybayin script seemed to have been introduced to them. In 1567, Miguel Lopez de Legazpi reported that they, the Visayans, have their letters and characters like those of the Malays. From whom they learned them, they write them on bamboo bark and palm leaves with a pointed tool. But never is any ancient writing found among them, nor word of their origin and arrival in these islands, their customs and rites being preserved by traditions handed down from father to son without any other record. The recorded pre-colonial history of the Philippines begins with the creation of the Laguna copperplate inscription in 900 and ends with the beginning of Spanish colonization in 1565. The inscription records its date of creation in 822, circa 900 CE. The discovery of this document marks the end of the prehistory of the Philippines at 900 AD. During this historical time period, the Philippine archipelago was home to numerous kingdoms and sultanates and was a part of the Indosphere and Sinosphere. Sources of pre-colonial history include archaeological, records from contact with the Song dynasty, the Brunei Sultanate, Korea, Japan, and Muslim traders, the genealogical records of Muslim rulers, accounts written by Spanish chroniclers in the 16th and 17th centuries, and cultural patterns that at the time had not yet been replaced through European influence. Early Philippine society was composed of such diverse subgroups as, for example, fishermen, farmers, and hunter-gatherers, with some living in mountainside swidens, some on houseboats, and some in commercially developed coastal ports. Some subgroups were economically self-sufficient, and others had symbiotic relationships with neighboring subgroups. Society can be classified into 4 categories as follows. 1. Classless societies, societies with no terms, which distinguish one social class from another. 2. Warrior societies, societies with a recognized class distinguished by prowess in battle. 3. Petty plutocrats, societies with a recognized class characterized by inherited real property. And 4. Principalities, societies with a recognized ruling class with inherited rights to assume political office or exercise central authority. The 4th societal category above can be termed the Dadu class and was a titled aristocracy. The early polities were typically made up of 3-tier social structure: a nobility class, a class of freemen, and a class of dependent debtor bondsmen. Dadu ruling class and Maganu noble class, where the Dadu ascends from. Maharlika Tamawa freeman, warrior class. Alapin dependent class, classified into Alapang Namamahay serfs and Alaping Seguiglad slaves. The earliest date suggested for direct Chinese contact with the Philippines was 982. At the time, merchants from Ma now thought to be either Bay, Laguna on the shores of Laguna de Bay, or a site called Mate. In Mindoro brought their wares to Guangzhou and Guangzhou. This was mentioned in the History of Song and Wengzi and Tongkao by Ma Duanlin, which were authored during the Yuan dynasty. Muslim traders introduced Islam to the then Indianized Malayan empires around the time that wars over succession had ended in the Majapahit Empire in 1405. However, by 1380, Makdum Karim had already brought Islam to the Philippine archipelago, establishing the Sheikh Karamal Makdum Mosque in Simunal, Tawi-Tawi, the oldest mosque in the country. By the 15th century, Islam was established in the Sulu archipelago and spread from there. Subsequent visits by Arab, Malay, and Javanese missionaries helped spread Islam further in the islands. The Sultanate of Sulu once encompassed parts of modern-day Indonesia, Malaysia, and the Philippines. Its royal house claims descent from Muhammad, although the archipelago may have been visited before by the Portuguese who conquered Malacca City in 1511 and reached Maluku Islands in 1512. The earliest European expedition to the Philippine archipelago was led by the Portuguese navigator Ferdinand Magellan in the service of King Charles I of Spain in 1521. The Magellan expedition sighted the mountains of Samar at dawn on March 17, 1521, making landfall the following day at the small, uninhabited island of Homenhon at the mouth of Leyte Gulf. On Easter Sunday, March 31st, 1521, in the island of Mazawa, Magellan planted a cross on the top of a hill overlooking the sea and claimed the islands he had encountered for the King of Spain, naming them Archipelago of St. Lazarus, as stated in First Voyage Around the World by his companion, the chronicler Antonio Pigafetta. Magellan sought alliances among the people in the islands, beginning with Datu Zula of Sugbu Cebu, and took special pride in converting them to Christianity. Magellan got involved in the political conflicts in the islands and took part in a battle against Lapu-Lapu, chief of Mactan, and an enemy of Datu Zula. Philip de Sudi became King of Spain on January 16, 1556, when his father, Charles V, abdicated both the Spanish and HRE thrones. The latter went to his uncle, Ferdinand I. On his return to Spain in 1559, the king ordered an expedition to the Spice Islands, stating that its purpose was to discover the islands of the West. In reality, its task was to conquer the Philippine Islands. On November 19th or 20, 1564, a Spanish expedition of a mere 500 men led by Miguel Lopez de Legazpi departed Barra de Navidad, New Spain, arriving at Cebu on February 13th, 1565. It was this expedition that established the first Spanish settlements. It also resulted in the discovery of the Tornaviaje, return route to Mexico across the Pacific by André de Urdaneta, heralding the Manila galleon trade, which lasted for 2.5 centuries. The arrival of Ferdinand Magellan in 1521 marked the beginning of Spanish colonization. Although Magellan himself met an untimely end in the Battle of Mactan, Spain continued its efforts to control the islands. By 1565, Miguel Lopez de Legazpi established the first permanent Spanish settlement in Cebu. The Spanish colonization of the Philippines, lasting from 1521 to 1898, began with the arrival of Ferdinand Magellan and culminated in the Spanish-American War, leaving a lasting impact on Filipino culture, language, and religion. The history of the Philippines from 1565 to 1898 is known as the Spanish colonial period, during which the Philippine Islands were ruled as the Captaincy General of the Philippines within the Spanish East Indies, initially under the Viceroyalty of New Spain, based in Mexico City, until the independence of the Mexican Empire from Spain in 1821. This resulted in direct Spanish control during a period of governmental instability there. The first documented European contact with the Philippines was made in 1521 by Ferdinand Magellan in his circumnavigation expedition, one during which he was killed in the Battle of Mactan. 44 years later, a Spanish expedition led by Miguel Lopez de Legazpi left modern Mexico and began the Spanish conquest of the Philippines in the late 16th century. Legazpi's expedition arrived in the Philippines in 1565, a year after an earnest intent to colonize the country, which was during the reign of Philip V of Spain, whose name has remained attached to the country. The Spanish colonial period ended with the defeat of Spain by the United States in the Spanish-American War and the Treaty of Paris on December 10, 1898, which marked the beginning of the American colonial era of Philippine history. The Spaniards had been exploring the Philippines since the early 16th century. Ferdinand Magellan, a Portuguese navigator in charge of a Spanish expedition to circumnavigate the globe, was killed by warriors of Datu Lapu-Lapu at the Battle of Mactan. In 1543, Rawai Lopez de Villalobos arrived at the islands of Leyte and Samar and named them Las Islas Filipinas in honor of Philip II of Spain, at the time Prince of Asturias. Philip became King of Spain on January 16, 1556, when his father, Charles I of Spain, who also reigned as Charles V, Holy Roman Emperor, abdicated the Spanish throne. Philip was in Brussels at the time, and his return to Spain was delayed until 1559 because of European politics and wars in Northern Europe. Shortly after his return to Spain, Philip ordered an expedition mounted to the Spice Islands, stating that its purpose was to discover the islands of the West. Its task was to conquer the Philippines for Spain. The population of Luzon and the Visayas at the time of the first Spanish missions is estimated at between 1 and 1.5 million, overall density being low. For over 300 years, Spain maintained control over the Philippines, profoundly impacting its culture, religion, and governance. The introduction of Christianity led to the widespread conversion of indigenous people, and Spanish became the lingua franca. Colonial architecture, including churches and forts, still stands today as a testament to this period. Spanish rule was met with resistance from various Filipino groups. The most notable revolt was the Philippine Revolution, led by figures such as José Rizal, Andrés Bonifacio, and Emilio Aguinaldo. Rizal's writings and Bonifacio's Katipunan movement galvanized the populace, leading to a full-scale revolution by 1896. Following the Spanish-American War in 1898, the Philippines was ceded to the United States. The Treaty of Paris marked the official transfer of power, but Filipino revolutionaries resisted American rule, leading to the Philippine-American War. The United States occupied the Philippines from 1898 to 1946, following the Spanish-American War. Spain ceded the Philippines to the U.S. in the Treaty of Paris, 1898. This led to the Philippine-American War I, 899, 1902, as Filipinos fought for independence. The U.S. established a military government, then transitioned to a civil government with a governor-general. The Philippines finally gained its independence on July 4th, 1946. Under American rule, the Philippines experienced significant changes. The introduction of public education, democratic governance, and economic reforms paved the way for modernization. Despite initial resistance, the American influence helped shape the country's future. The Philippines was thrust into the global conflict during World War II. In 1941, Japanese forces invaded and occupied the islands, leading to years of hardship and struggle. Filipinos formed guerrilla groups and fought alongside Allied forces to reclaim their country. The Japanese occupation of the Philippines during World War II began with the invasion in December 1941 and lasted until the end of the war in 1945. The occupation saw fierce fighting, including the Battle of Bataan and the Battle of Corregidor, and widespread resistance from Filipino and American forces, as well as guerrilla warfare. The Philippines was finally liberated by Allied forces in 1944. 1945. The Japanese invasion commenced in December 1941, 9 hours after the attack on Pearl Harbor. The combined Filipino-American forces were defeated in the battles of Bataan and Corregidor, leading to the surrender of the main forces in 1942. The Japanese established an occupation government and sought to exploit the Philippines for resources and strategic advantage. Despite the fall of the main Allied forces, resistance continued throughout the war, fueled by Filipino guerrillas, remnants of the Filipino Army, and American agents. The Allied liberation of the Philippines began with the Leyte landings in October 1944, culminating in the liberation of Manila in early 1945, though fighting continued elsewhere until the end of the war. The occupation was marked by Japanese war crimes, including the Bataan Death March, massacres in Manila, and the use of comfort women. The occupation had a devastating impact on the Philippines, causing widespread death, displacement, and economic hardship. The resistance movement, along with the eventual Allied invasion, played a crucial role in ending the occupation. The defeat of Japan in 1945 marked the end of its occupation, and in 1946, the Philippines gained independence from the United States. At 7:15 p.m. on September 23, 1972, President Ferdinand Marcos declared martial law, marking a dark period in Philippine history. Marcos's regime was characterized by human rights abuses, political repression, and economic decline. The People Power Revolution of 1986, led by Corazon Aquino, resulted in Marcos's ouster and the restoration of democracy. President Ferdinand Marcos announced on television that he had placed the Philippines under martial law, stating he had done so in response to the communist threat posed by the newly founded Communist Party of the Philippines CPP and the sectarian rebellion of the Muslim Independence Movement MIM. Opposition figures of the time such as Lorenzo Tañada, Jose W. Diokno, and Jovito Salonga accused Marcos of exaggerating these threats and using them as an excuse to consolidate power and extend his tenure beyond the 2 presidential terms allowed by the 1935 Constitution. Marcos signed Proclamation 1081 on September 21st, 1972, marking the beginning of a 14-year period of one-man rule, which effectively lasted until Marcos was exiled from the country on February 25th, 1986. Proclamation 1081 was formally lifted on January 17th, 1981 by Proclamation 2045, although Marcos retained essentially all of his powers as dictator until he was ousted in February 1986. This 9-year period in Philippine history is remembered for the Marcos administration's record of human rights abuses, particularly targeting political opponents, student activists, journalists, religious workers, farmers, and others who fought against the Marcos dictatorship. Based on the documentation of Amnesty International, Task Force detainees of the Philippines, and similar human rights monitoring entities, historians believe that the Marcos dictatorship was marked by 3,257 known extrajudicial killings, 35,000 documented tortures, 737 enforced disappearances, and 70,000 incarcerations. After Marcos was ousted, government investigators discovered that the declaration of martial law had also allowed the Marcoses to hide secret stashes of unexplained wealth that various courts later determined to be of criminal origin. Today, the Philippines is a dynamic nation with a rapidly growing economy. It faces contemporary challenges such as natural disasters, political instability, and social inequality. Despite these issues, the resilience and spirit of the Filipino people continue to drive the nation forward. The Philippines in the modern era is characterized by a blend of historical influences, diverse cultures, and ongoing challenges in its political and economic landscape. It is a nation with a rich history, including periods of Spanish and American colonization, which have shaped its language, religion, and political systems. Contemporary issues include navigating its strategic geopolitical position, managing its diverse population and cultures, and addressing economic disparities. The Philippines is renowned for its rich cultural heritage. Festivals, traditional dances, and indigenous crafts reflect the diverse influences that have shaped the country. Filipino cuisine, famous for dishes like adobo and lechon, is celebrated worldwide. As the Philippines moves forward, it aims to balance economic growth with social justice and environmental sustainability. The nation's history serves as a foundation for its future aspirations, ensuring that the legacy of its past continues to inspire generations. The history of the Philippines is a tapestry woven with threads of triumph, struggle, and resilience. From ancient civilizations to modern times, the archipelago stands as a testament to the enduring spirit of its people. As the country evolves, its rich heritage remains a cornerstone of its identity and a beacon of hope for the future. Thank you so much for joining me in exploring my country. I hope you have enjoyed your time with me. Maybe one day you can come to my country and say hello. Until next time, take care.